History often remembers kings for their conquests, their crowns, and the blood spilled in their name. But behind those thrones stood women, veiled not in power, but in science. Harem Sultan began her life not as a queen, but as cargo, stolen from her home, sold into slavery, and caged within the walls of a harem. Yet she would rise from a number to a name, and from a name to legend. This is not a love story. This is a story of survival, strategy, and sacrifice. Because in the Ottoman palace, affection was a weapon, and Harem knew how to wield it. No one knows what her birth name truly was. Perhaps Anastasia, or Alexandra Lisowska, the daughter of a Christian priest from the Polish-Lithuanian borderlands, somewhere in present-day Ukraine. What we do know is that her childhood ended in fire and screaming. Crimean Tatar raiders descended on her village like vultures. She was ripped from her family and marched to the slave markets of Kaffa. She was young, likely no more than now, but the men who bought her knew her value wasn't in her labour. It was in her face to us. Her striking red hair and bright eyes made her rare, exotic, and for that they took her to Constantinople, not to serve a home, but an empire. There she was sold to the household of the Sultan's mother and given a new name, Harem, the cheerful one. A cruel irony. Cheerfulness would be her armour. She entered the Ottoman harem, known as the Forbidden Place. Not just a palace wing, but a machine. A mechanism to produce heirs, control women, and keep the royal bloodline politically untangled. The Sultan could not marry a noblewoman. He had to be above all bloodlines, so he bred with slaves. Harem was now one of hundreds of enslaved women, hidden behind gilded gates. To the outside world, they lived in paradise. Opulent rooms tiled in blues and greens, silk cushions, fountains, sweet perfumes, music. It was called the abode of felicity. But behind the gold was something far colder. Control, surveillance, silence. Here, a girl was trained, not in freedom, but in obedience. She was taught music, poetry, dance, embroidery, calligraphy, and the languages of seduction. Every gesture mattered. Even the way she walked was corrected. The harem wasn't about desire, it was about dominance. It was where politics dressed itself in perfume and silk. And every woman inside was both a prisoner and a potential queen. The Sultan's mother, Hafsa Sultan, controlled the rotation of bedmates, not the Sultan himself. And when it came time to choose a concubine for her son, she chose Harem. This was not a fairy tale invitation, it was a performance. Harem was bathed, oiled, painted with henna, stripped of every hair on her body with arsenic paste and a sharpened shell. Then she was dressed in jewels and silk. Musicians played as she crawled on her knees to the Sultan's bed. Suleiman the Magnificent, newly crowned and still grieving his father's death, called her to him, and unlike most concubines, who were enjoyed for a night, perhaps a few, he called her again, and again, and again. Harem was more than beautiful. She was clever, witty, and cheerful, not demure but magnetic. She knew poetry. She could talk to Suleiman not just as a concubine, but as a companion. And he was a poet himself. But her rise made enemies. Chief among them was Mahidevran, Suleiman's former favourite, and the mother of his eldest son, Mustafa. Mahidevran saw her status slipping, and one day she attacked Harem, clawing her face, and when the Sultan summoned Harem again, she declined, calling herself soiled meat. It was a devastating move. Rather than repel Suleiman, it intrigued him. She told him what Mahidevran had done, and in that moment she won his heart and his trust. Harem didn't just survive the palace. She learned to bend its rules. She knew when to resist, when to provoke sympathy, and how to speak without begging. That was her genius. Soon after, Harem gave birth to a son, Prince Mehmed. That changed everything. In the Ottoman system, only one son per mother was permitted. The logic was brutal. If multiple sons had the same mother, they might unite and rebel. But now Harem had an heir, and with him, a grip on Suleiman's future. But rather than fading from the Sultan's favour, she bore him 5 more children, 4 more sons and a daughter. This was unheard of. Suleiman was violating long-standing custom. He had no interest in moving on. Hurrem was not just a lover, she was becoming something the empire feared, a constant. Whispers filled the court. They said she used witchcraft, that she had poisoned Mahidevran's womb, that she had bewitched the Sultan. Suleiman's advisors brought in other red-haired slaves to tempt him. He gave them away. He gave all the other concubines away. He wrote poetry to her, called her his moonlight, his springtime, his only joy. Throne of my lonely niche, my wealth, my love. My most sincere friend, my confidant, my existence, my sultan, my one and only love. Hurrem had done the impossible. She had made a sultan fall in love. But love in a palace is never just love. It's loyalty, it's distraction, and above all, it's dangerous. Behind every silken veil was a dagger, and Hurrem had just risen too far, too fast in the world to a palace built on envy, bloodlines, and betrayal. What came next would test her loyalty, her motherhood, and her morality. Because in the Ottoman court, power never came without a price. When a woman rises in a man's world, they call her manipulative. When she takes power in a palace of slaves, they call her a witch. And when she defies centuries of royal custom, they call her dangerous. Hurrem Sultan had climbed to the unthinkable, not just the Sultan's favourite, not just the mother of princes, but something the empire had never seen. A woman who would not be set aside. But power, especially in the Ottoman court, never came without blood. And Hurrem knew, if she did not move first, someone else would. 14 years after she entered the palace, Hurrem did the unthinkable. She married the Sultan. He freed her from slavery and made her his legal wife, in direct violation of royal tradition. No Sultan had married a concubine in over a century. She was crowned Haseki Sultan, given 2,000 aspers a day, and moved into royal apartments beside her husband, apartments forbidden to women since Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. The court was stunned. So was the world. An enslaved Christian girl from Ruthenia was now the most powerful woman in the empire. Some called it madness, others called it black magic. To us it may seem romantic, a love story that triumphed over tradition, but to the Ottoman elite it was heresy. The palace wasn't just resisting a woman in power, it was resisting the idea that a slave could rewrite the rules. But Hurrem didn't just bask in power, she wielded it. She became a patron of the people, using her wealth to build mosques, schools, fountains, and a women's hospital next to the slave market. A symbolic gesture few noticed, but none could deny. She funded soup kitchens that fed thousands. She helped strengthen diplomatic ties between the Ottoman Empire and her native Poland. And quietly, she helped reshape the role of women in Ottoman society. Hurrem was not the first woman to suffer the harem, but she might have been the first to turn it into a throne. Even as Suleiman waged war in Hungary, Belgrade, and Vienna, he continued to write her. Their letters were filled with longing and tenderness. In one she wrote, "If the seas were to become ink and the trees pens, they could not write the anguish of this parting." But the letters weren't just romantic, they were political. In them, Hurrem warned Suleiman about threats to her children, and one name in particular, Mustafa. Prince Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son by Mahidevran, was beloved by the military and the people. Tall, bold, noble, he had the look of a sultan. But for Hurrem, he was a threat. Ottoman succession was not primogeniture. When a sultan died, all sons had equal claim, and only one could live, the rest were strangled. This was law. If Mustafa became sultan, her sons would die. And so Hurrem moved. First she targeted Ibrahim Pasha, the sultan's closest advisor, his brother-in-arms. Ibrahim had once been a slave like her, but now he had grown arrogant, wealthy, and dangerously loyal to Mustafa. He once bragged, "Though I am the sultan's slave, I could make a prince from a stable boy." Hurrem whispered doubts into Suleiman's ear. Corruption, bribery, disloyalty. And then Suleiman invited his old friend to dinner. They talked long into the night. They laughed. They reminisced. Then, once Ibrahim fell asleep, Suleiman gave the order. He was strangled with a silk bowstring, the execution of princes. No blood spilled. The next morning the palace awoke to shock. Ibrahim was gone, and Harem was still standing. She had removed a man who once helped shape the empire, not with poison, not with rebellion, but with whispers. Harem had learned. In the Ottoman court, silence was louder than screams. Still Mustafa lived and flourished. As her sons grew, so did their danger. When her eldest son, Mehmed, died of smallpox at 21, Harem was shattered, not just from grief but from fear. She had fewer cards to play. She married her daughter, Mihrima, to the new Grand Vizier, Rustam Pasha, a man loyal only to her. Together, they began to sow rumours in the Sultan's court that Mustafa was plotting a coup. Suleiman hesitated. He loved his son, but suspicion, once planted, grows quickly. Then came the final act. Mustafa, hearing of the allegations, rushed to his father's camp in Persia, desperate to clear his name. He entered Suleiman's tent. He bowed, but before he could speak, the guards seized him. He was strangled before his father's eyes. Suleiman watched in silence. With Mustafa dead, Harem's line was now uncontested, but the price was steep. Her youngest son, Cihangir, was born with a malformed spine. He died soon after Mustafa, many say from grief. That left only Selim and Bayezid, 2 sons, 1 throne, and when the day came, one would have to kill the other. Perhaps it was a mercy that Harem never saw it. She fell ill in her 50s. Suleiman, the man who had once defied the world to marry her, stayed at her bedside. When she died in 1558, the empire paused. The Sultanate had lost its most powerful woman, and Suleiman had lost the only person who had ever truly stood beside him. He would mourn her for 8 years. His silk robes gave way to linen, his golden plates to earthen bowls. When he died, he asked to be buried beside her, not as emperor and concubine, but as man and wife. Harem Sultan died with a crown no concubine was meant to wear, but even in death her story wasn't over. Because in the Ottoman Empire, power didn't pass gently from mother to son. It arrived with a bowstring. Harem had fought to build a future for her children, and succeeded. But now, with her gone, only one truth remained. For one of her sons to live, the other had to die. In the shadows of the throne, the children of the woman once called a witch would now finish her game of survival. And this time, there would be no love poems, only blood. When Harem died in 1558, the palace dimmed. Suleiman the Magnificent, once a man of gold, grew quiet. He stopped changing into fresh silk each day. He began eating from clay bowls. He prayed more, spoke less. The woman who had lit his world through fire, through fury, was gone, and with her, the last restraint on the battle between her sons. 2 remained, Selim, the hedonist, known for wine and laughter, and Bayezid, the bolder of the 2, quick-tempered but charismatic. Harem had loved them both, but she knew, and now they knew, only one would wear the crown. Harem played her hand with brilliance, but the final card was not hers to lay. The system she manipulated was ancient, and it did not forgive loose ends. Bayezid resented his brother. He believed Selim was weak, indulgent, lazy, corrupted by luxury, and he wasn't wrong. Selim had a taste for pleasure, not politics, but Selim had something far more important, loyal allies, including Rustam Pasha, Harem's old confidant, and his father's favour. When their rivalry boiled over into open defiance, Bayezid rebelled. He fled with his sons to the Persian border, hoping to build a new support base, but Suleiman saw only treason. The order was swift, the betrayal complete. Bayezid was hunted down, his 5 sons were strangled beside him, no mercy, no escape. The line Harem had fought so hard to preserve was reduced to one surviving thread, Selim II. In 1566, Suleiman died on the battlefield, still mourning his wife, still haunted by what power had cost him. He was buried beside Harem in a marble tomb at the Suleymaniye Mosque, the empire's greatest architectural jewel. Their son Selim II now took the throne, but he was not his father's son in spirit. Nicknamed Selim the Sot, he preferred wine to war, comfort to conquest. The empire, which had once expanded under Sulayman's iron rule, began to soften, and yet Selim's rule, while forgettable, opened a door Harem had cracked: the rise of women in Ottoman power. Harem was called dangerous not just because she seized power, but because she proved a woman could, and the empire would never be the same. After Harem's death, a new era began, one historians now call the Sultanate of Women. For nearly a century, the wives, mothers, and daughters of sultans wielded tremendous power behind the scenes. From the harem, they advised ministers, issued orders, even helped declare wars. None of it would have been possible without Harem. Women like Kosum Sultan and Turhan Hatis would rule as regents, playing the game Harem mastered, navigating deadly succession struggles, influencing foreign policy, reshaping religion, charity, and architecture, all from within veiled walls. But none would match Harem's legacy. She had begun as a stolen girl sold for silver. She had endured beatings, jealousy, isolation. She had clawed her way up in a system that was not only male-dominated, but designed to forget women entirely. And yet she was remembered. Was Harem a schemer, a manipulator? Yes, but what choice did she have? In a world where her survival depended on her son wearing a crown and her rivals dying before him, morality was a luxury she couldn't afford. Harem lived by the rules of the harem until she rewrote them. She killed, not with daggers, but with decisions. Her victories were lined with funerals, her ambition matched only by her devotion. We like to imagine that love can survive in palaces, but the truth is, in places like the Ottoman court, love was a weapon, and Harem was both the blade and the hand that held it. Today you can still visit her. Her tomb lies beside Sulayman's, just as she had always dreamed. Intricately tiled, adorned with poetry and Quranic verses, it doesn't whisper of scandal or seduction. It tells the story of a woman who conquered the unconquerable, not with an army but with intellect, resolve, and unshakable ambition. And still her name divides opinion. Some say she was a villain, others a hero, some a witch, others a saint. But in the end, she was something far more dangerous than all of those. She was a woman who survived and refused to disappear. Harem Sultan's story reminds us that power is rarely given. It is taken, carved out, earned with sacrifice. She lived in a world that wanted her silent, but she made herself impossible to ignore. And while the empire she helped shape has long since crumbled, her story endures, not just in marble and manuscripts, but in every woman who dares to rise in a place where she was told to kneel. If you were moved by Harem's story, by her resilience, her pain, her fire, we invite you to join the conversation. Like this video, if you believe her voice deserved to be heard, comment below which part of the world you're watching from. Subscribe to Grim History for more haunting stories of forgotten power, betrayal, and the women who refuse to vanish.